Mary Beth O'Connor is the author of the award-winning memoir, From Junkie to Judge, One Woman's Triumph Over Trauma and Addiction. In this episode, Mary Beth gives us insight into her journey from crystal meth addiction to becoming an administrative law judge. We talk about white privilege, racial disparity in drug laws, and so much more, y'all.
I really wanted to own that I shot meth, and I did it for, a large chunk of 15 years. And so, because as you say, when I see people shooting meth in the media, they're really presented as they're living in a house with a lot of garbage around, and they're presented almost like they're animals in a zoo, right? Because if we could catch the kids earlier and help them heal and deal with their pain, then they may not ever get to the point of picking up the substances or using them in an unhealthy way.
Let's do this, my people. Hello, all of my fabulous, fabulous children out there, and welcome back to the Sex, Drugs, and Jesus podcast. I have with me today my good old friend, Mary Beth O'Connor, coming to us from the Bay Area. And now she wrote a book called From Junkie to Judge, and that title just grabs my heart in so many different ways. Mary Beth, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Looking forward to talking with you.
Okay, absolutely. And y'all, in this episode, we're going to be talking about how Mary Beth overcame her methamphetamine addiction, became a judge. She says in her own words that she beat addiction without God. We'll talk about her book. We'll talk about some of this training that she does for lawyers and judges, and this op-ed that she wrote in the LA Times about how she felt about her take on white privilege and things like that, which I think will be most titillating and interesting. So, just a little bit about her background. She's about 6 years into recovery still, or is that
No,
how
I
you?
just had 30 years of sobriety in January. 6 years is when I went to law school.
Okay, so at 6 years is when you okay, so she went to law school at Berkeley Law. She worked at a large firm in Silicon Valley. Then she litigated class action lawsuits for the federal government. I love me a good class action lawsuit. And then in 2014, Mary Beth was appointed a federal administrative law judge, from which she retired in 2020. She first shot up methamphetamine when she was 17. And this goes on to read, as an abused child seeking relief from trauma and stress, she turned to alcohol at age 12 and had used numerous drugs to excess before sticking that needle in her arm. In 1979, at age 18, she was arrested for possession of methamphetamines and syringes. Can you talk to me about just hearing this background here from you? You were talking about from age 12. One of the chapter titles in your book was called Molestations. And so there was things that went on before age 12. And so you went to law school. Hearing this history of yours, you're the person who lived this. How does it make you feel just hearing this brief synopsis?
Well, I mean, part of the way that book came about is because when I became a judge, I was 20 years sober in 2014, but it really made me reflect back, how did I go from an abused, I was physically abused, sexually abused, emotionally abused in multiple ways, parents, strangers, and then I was a full-blown addict in high school. I did not get sober, so I was 32, and yet I became a judge. And so it was sort of a time to think about, how did I do this? How did I manage to pull out of it and have a happy and productive life? And that's part of why I talk about it, because I want to sort of help reduce stigma, but also be a reassurance that if you yourself or your loved one is in a really horrible place with substance use disorder, it doesn't mean it's too late. It doesn't mean there's not a way out, because I found it at 32, not as young as I wish, but, I found the path forward, and, I have a happy and joyful life at this point.
Well, cheers to a happy and joyful life. And y'all, Mary Beth, she does speaking engagements. She sits on the board for a few different organizations that have to do with recovery as well. And so she's not just sitting on her laurels. she got her victory, now she wants to help other people get it too, and that's what the sex, drugs, and Jesus on my work is all about, Mary Beth and I didn't take our happy, endings and go run off quietly into rainbows and daisy fields, we're yet in the trenches, and we visit those rainbows and daisy fields regularly, but we just don't stay there because we like y'all to come join us too. So I'm going to read some of these chapter titles from the book because I have a thing about chapter titles because, I just feel like a chapter title can just be so fun, and so creative. And some of them say like my first shot, meaning like her drugs, first kidnapping. Then there's like another kidnapping title too that happens down the road, protecting the siblings, as I stated earlier, molestations. Alcohol is a chapter title, pot, sex, pills, acid, Gina, Cindy, uh, promiscuity, speed again, down the corporate ladder. And then there was this one called Atheist Challenges. Now, you mentioned that you had beat addiction without God. I also saw like Narcotics Anonymous make an appearance, briefly. How did you beat your addiction without God?
So when I went into rehab, and it was 93 when I went in, they swore to me, I mean, adamantly and vehemently, that the only way to recover was the 12-step way. And 12 steps, of course, is Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, all of the Anonymouses, right? And that was a problem because I was an atheist, but also I didn't like other aspects of the 12-step program. You're supposed to turn over your will in your life. Well, I wasn't going to do that. You have to agree you're powerless. So I didn't agree with that. There's a real focus on defects, which really didn't think was a great idea. But they said, "This is it, right? That's all there is." And so at first, I was first of all shocked, like, "Okay, this is medical treatment, and you're telling me I have to do something with faith that I can't do." But I believe them, and so I mean, I read all of the AA Big Book, I read all of the NA texts, I looked for the parts I could use, and there were some ideas that I found helpful, like one day at a time is a sort of a 12-step mantra. I found that useful. I looked at the powerless step again and I thought, well, what I could agree is that I am powerless to moderate. It's like there's no moderating for me. But it still was just a bad fit. And so when I got home, and I want to emphasize for the younger people, it's 94 and there's no Google. Okay. But I thought, is it really true that there's no other option besides 12 steps? And so I went to the library and I did the research, and it wasn't true in 1994. And it's much less true today, and so there are other approaches, secular options, or really it's not so much the lack of faith because a lot of religious people do the other options. It's really the biggest difference is that it's about self empowerment versus viewing yourself as powerless or turning over your will in your life. And so what I did was I went to the other programs. I found Women for Sobriety, which still exists today. I found Rational Recovery, which today is mostly Smart Recovery. I found Secular Organization for Sobriety, which today is really LifeRing Secular Recovery. And those programs focus on building up yourself, on building up your competence, and on you as the decision maker in your recovery. But also, for example, in LifeRing, we talk about the individual nature of a recovery plan, that what works for me may not work for you, and vice versa. And so it's really up to us to hopefully to listen, to absorb the ideas, to think about these suggestions, but to really make decisions for our own recovery. And that's what I did. I built what today would be called a personal plan or patchwork plan. And as I said, I just had 30 years of continuous sobriety. So I think it was a good option for me.
Gosh, I'm happy you found your way, and I'm happy that you didn't give up and let the brokenness of the anonymous movement deter you or be a I'm gonna say this with love, or be a fool and keep going back into those treatments, even though there are really a lot of results and that they don't have a high success rate. And I tried Narcotics Anonymous, Crystal Meth Anonymous, Cocaine Anonymous, all the different anonymouses. movements. I was in Sex Addicts Anonymous. You know, and I agree there was some useful things in all of them, but not enough to really fix or cure anything. I did not like how you said, like, the beating up of people. They were all very fear-based to me. It was like, if you dare do anything, relapse or whatever, then you'll lose everything in the world you worked for, and everything you do have is because of this recovery. It's almost like it low key made a god out of the 12 steps without saying that it made a god out of the 12 steps. And then it turned it into like the church of the 12 steps without saying that. Because people who are deep into those recovery, those 12 step programs, it's like everywhere they go and anything they say, it's the 12 steps this. Like they don't even have a conversation, some of them without mentioning the 12 steps. And I'm all like, it's very cult-like after a while, which is very churchy-like in the same breath. It's interesting, different paths for different people. I'm happy that you saw it. Like, it really, really breaks my heart when people are like, say, their 10th time in rehab trying the 12 steps, and I'm all like, "Baby, it's not working for you. We need
Try
different."
something else. Try something else. I mean, I'll say this, look, 12 steps for, a proportion of people like it and they do well. But the problem is when 12-step people claim it's the only way or a better way, neither of which is true. The other thing I'll say is that it's not even like there's a clear religion versus non-religious division because there are atheists and agnostics that make 12 steps work, but there are a lot of faith-based people that do the other programs because they like the self-empowerment approach better, or they don't like the sponsor side because sponsorship has pros and cons. And so it's really about for me, it's about letting people know that of the choices so they can find the right fit. Because if you find the right fit, you're going to have a better chance of success. Don't try to force yourself into the wrong box. You're not going to have as good of odds then. And as you say, if you tried something and it didn't work, maybe try something else or add something else in. It should be about looking at all the ideas and seeing what's gonna be best for you. But yeah, the adamancy that and look, I don't say that my way is gonna work for everyone either. My way will work for some people and it won't work for others. It's really about thinking about who you are and what techniques you find most useful.
Mhm. Absolutely. So I want to talk about the book cover because I also have a thing besides chapter titles, book covers as well. So again, the title is From Junkie to Judge. I'm going to show this, as I'm editing it. So I'll describe it. I'm going to put a picture of this up for the YouTube channel. So I love the colors, black, red, and white. Spiritually speaking, that combination is very potent with like blocking and banishing and like reversing negative energy, you
Ah,
know, when used a certain way. And when I first started my lingerie store down under apparel, our original color scheme was also red, black, and white back in the day when it was still down under menswear, but now we have men's, women, and non-binary clothing. So from junkie to judge, one woman's triumph over trauma and addiction, Mary Beth O'Connor. It sounds like a one night engagement in New York City, kind of thing. So in junkie, she has that word. It looks like it's in like crack or cocaine or maybe like some very
yes. It's
fine weed.
white powder. Yes, yes,
Right.
white. Yeah.
And then for the judge, she has those Judge Judy classic pearl necklace, pearl going on. Is there anything you'd like to tell us about your inspiration for this? I can see the transition from the powder to the pearl necklace, but maybe there's something here you'd like to say.
Well, I will say, so my idea when I knew to the publisher, and I told them I am not a graphic artist, right? But my idea was maybe to have a syringe and a gavel. And they thought, well, that's sort of like a pulp, pulp magazine or something. And so their graphic artist came up with the powder and the pearls, and I loved it. I just think it's more sophisticated. It's a little more nuanced, but it really does show the contrast and the color scheme. They offered me many different color schemes, and this is the one that we landed on. So, if you publish a book with a publisher, you will find that picking your cover is a process. There are a lot of people who have opinions, but I'm really happy with the end result. And so I'm really comfortable with it. I do like what the graphic artist did is much better than my simple little idea about a gavel and a needle.
I like where you were going with the syringe. So my book, on the cover of the Sex, Drugs, and Jesus memoir that I wrote, I have a crow holding a syringe standing on top of a skull. And I
Ooh.
have and I have all kinds of imagery in there and things like that. And every little thing is super intentional and everything is a whole story. And I was inspired by, like, say, Madonna, who whenever she produces any kind of show, album cover, anything like that, every little detail and every song and every video carries like its own storyline to it. And I wanted my work to be that way. But
Well, and I will say for me, the subtitle was that kind of a conversation. My original subtitle in my draft when I was looking for a publisher was Recovery Without God. But the publisher thought that the one woman's triumph over trauma and addiction, and they're right. It captures the whole book better because my book does really start with why I picked up alcohol at 12, why I was shooting meth at 17. I felt like a lot of recovery memoirs sort of jump into the crazy drug stories, but there's no context. And the reality is that because I had extensive long term, lived in an abusive household, had multiple other assaults, my odds of developing a substance use disorder were much higher than the general population, probably 5 to 10 times as high because of the number and frequency of the traumas. And so I really wanted to show that, like, to try to help people understand why did it make sense to me to use drugs at that level. And the reality is in the beginning, they seem to work. Like, that's why you keep going. They turn into a major problem, but in the beginning, there's a reason for it and it seems to work. And then 30% of the book is actually recovery, right? I wanted to show how I built a non-12 step recovery plan, but also the trauma recovery. Because the reality is, I wouldn't be living a happy and joyful life if I hadn't done a lot of hard work on my trauma as well. I mean, it took me longer to get my PTSD and anxiety under control than it took to get my substances under control. And that's just common. I mean, a lot of women and even a significant percentage of men walk in the rooms with those kind of issues. And they have to, if you're going to live your best life, you really have to address both sides, not just the substances, but the underneath reason that drove you to the substances in the first place.
yeah, and that's another reason why people who are like on their 10th or however many trip to either rehab or a 12-step thing still have the same issue. Not only is the program like, not really as functional as it's claiming to be, but the people who are going aren't telling themselves the truth. The last time, about the real reasons that they're there is not actually for the rush of the drug or even for the community that can come along with hanging out in drug houses or know people who get high. That's the sort of stuff you stay for. But what you're numbing are the molestations, the abuse, and you got to tell yourself the truth about that. The last time I was in the mental hospital up here at the Bronx Veterans Affairs Hospital, one of the social workers, he'd been there 30 years. About the time you got sober, he was starting his work, his career here at the VA. And he was like 50% of the males who come through the psych ward have suffered from some sort of sexual abuse in their youth. And most of them identify as straight. Okay. And he said that unequivocally, just like flatly, period. There's all kinds of sexual molestation that have happened to people. And this is a huge reason why we have the drug problem we have, in this country.
Yeah, the one thing I'll add to that is sometimes people ask me, what's the number one thing we can do to reduce the substance use disorder rate in America? And America does have one of the highest addiction rates in the world. I mean, it's very high. And what I say to that is mental health treatment for kids, right? Because if we could catch the kids earlier and help them heal and deal with their pain, then they may not ever get to the point of picking up the substances or using them in in an unhealthy way. And so I agree that that is at the core of a lot of it. The other thing is that a lot of us in the middle of our addiction, new traumas happen, right? I mean, you can hang out with crazy people and bad things happen sometimes. And so even if you don't start out with trauma, living that in that world can create new traumas.
I am all for kids being enrolled in mental health as soon as they can talk. However, right? However, the thing is, this will require parents actually having their shit together enough to see that that's gonna be beneficial and why. The juxtaposition is that just by virtue of a parent bringing their child to a mental health person is like testifying against the parent if that parent has not done their shadow work and worked on their own issues. So it's gonna make that parent feel bad and, some like, in some type of bad way because parents just because they had a kid don't mean they actually ever fix their own issues themselves. And so typically you cannot give away what you don't have. And this is why you have broken people raising broken people. I
You
some
are you already agree with that. Also, that if it's the abuser that's in the household, which,
Yeah.
most abusers are in the household, right? They may not get help. But the other thing is that there also isn't equal access to treatment, right? Whether it's mental health treatment or whether it's substance use disorder treatment. There are parents out there who want to get help for their kids. And if they don't have insurance or they don't live in a community that offers low cost or free treatment, they can't always even access it. So right now, we don't even have treatment available for everyone who's looking for it. But you are right. There is another group that even if it was available, there would be obstacles within their family for them to be treated.
And I just wanna add, it's usually gonna be like the straight people in your family molesting your kids. That's the statistical fact. I've been in trainings and things like that when I used to volunteer with kids and when they would put the pictures of the, local registered sex offenders, one half would be women, and then the other half would be, like, predominantly males who identify as straight. There wouldn't be any queer people, in the debriefings that I sat in. With me as a kid, it was a straight uncle who molested me. I've had people on my show and talk to people. It's like the male babysitter or it's the stepdad who mom went and got hitched to after the abusive, actual paternal dad was kicked out of the picture. Then the mom stayed broken and went and got another abusive person. So now he's molesting the daughter or the son whenever the mom's at work. So stop trying to blame the gays for everything, honey. While you were looking at us, it was the straight people going in there and having sex with your children. You fool. You shouldn't have done that. So-
It's true. I mean, the majority, a larger group is heterosexual, and so, but even just by doing the math, most
Right.
child abuse,
Yeah.
physical or sexual, is going to be heterosexual. And you're right. For me, it was my stepfather was my first sexual abuser, and that's common. The other thing is it's often within the family or friend unit, and there's a lot of fear about strangers. And it's not that you shouldn't be, teach how to protect yourself reasonably from strangers, but the reality is it's usually people you know.
Yeah. Because the people that we know, yeah, I had Dr. Lisa Smith on my show from down in Florida. She was explaining to me how people who we know, they like to get in close to people, win trust, and they do a thing called grooming
Yes.
of the
Yeah.
parents to get you comfortable enough for you to let your guard down before they swoop in to take advantage of your child when you're not looking. So
That's
and that
yeah.
was a jaw on the floor moment for me because that very thing happened to me when I was a teenager and was molested again by, like, like this guy at church. And so one of the things that I read when I was researching, you said, my drug addiction story has been a humbling series of breaks, granting me second and third chances. I wanted to take just like a moment of silence and give gratitude for my part, to God and the Holy Trinity first. And I mean that in the non-churchiest of ways. That I don't do organized religion and I don't do church, but I'm super, super like into the Trinity. For when I stood before judges who, when the prosecutor wanted to send me up the river and throw the book at me because a lot of them tend to be very judgmental, for not for rehabilitative purposes. They just hate people, and their job gives them a way to judge others in like a very mean way. But the judge looked at me when I had my drug charges and everything and saw like this broken kid who had no priors. When I was reading that in your story, something clearly happened to make us suddenly start to break bad. And the judge saw this and gave me like probation. In your case, it was, ordered to be wiped away from your record after you did everything that you were supposed to do. The prosecutor in my case was like the devil going, "Burn them at the stake," and the judge was like, "No, we're gonna work with this kid because this is deeper than just somebody who wants to go out there and just act the fool and cut up." From the outside, it looks like we're having so much fun with all of these drugs, but it's just not the case. And so I wanted to just give gratitude to the judges out there and the people who have to do with law enforcement who can see us, really, really see that we need help and not to be put back in jail or not that we need like help. And so
That's right. I mean, look, I support decriminalization of all personal use, and I do it for a number of reasons. One of them is that the government recognizes that substance use disorder is a medical condition, and yet we throw people in jail for it. Well, that's a contradiction. Okay.
and
Another is that it costs 3 to 4 times as much to jail a person than to treat them. And so even if you just care about how your tax dollars are being used, putting people on jail for possession is actually going to be much more expensive. And it also doesn't have as good a results as giving people evidence-based treatment. But the other problem is the vast racial disparity in the way the drug laws are enforced. And so a person of color is, 3 to 4 times as likely to have charges and to get if they are stopped, they're much more likely to get searched. If they're searched and there's drugs, they're more likely to get charged. If the charges tend to be higher and the sentences tend to be longer. So we don't even fairly enforce the drug laws that we have for the same behavior. People of color are penalized at a lot higher. And so that was one of the things I talked about. I mean, the last 10 years that I used from 22 to 32, I had meth on me every day. And I was stopped multiple times by the police and I was never searched, and I knew it was because I was a middle-class white woman driving through my neighborhood, and so for all of those reasons, I support, decriminalization for personal use. I think we need to use those dollars to give people treatment and also supports when they get out of treatment, right? We sort of wrap around how to help them get a job, deal with their other health issues, get them into, other mental health treatment and all those things. And our money will be a lot better spent and a lot more effectively spent.
right, one thing I love about your story is that like the way you like you're saying the way you look and present is not like the way your typical methamphetamine user is often portrayed in
Yes.
documentaries and movies and things like that. And it's something that from a spiritual perspective that I think weakens people, and I think God sets certain factions into place to present people the opportunity to sow bad karma for themselves or good karma in the future. Because, like, say here in New York, crackheads like everywhere. Okay, fine. But I see some people be really judgy, of them because of, I mean, the obvious ones who are like scratching around for crumbs on the ground and badgering you for money. But I'm more like, as a drug dealer, though, I used to sell, these sort of things to people who made well into six figures, if not more, who had all their teeth in place and everything like that. And you could not tell, the difference. And so then I'm like, are people being mean because of the way these people look? Is it because of the drugs? Because you drive the point home that it's not in the look, it's not in where you're from. These drugs don't discriminate. They don't give a damn about somebody's physical net worth, their racial background, or anything like that. I think that your story reminds people that it can affect anyone and nobody's out of reach of being harmed by the drugs either.
Right. I mean, I really wanted to own that I shot meth and I did it like for, a large chunk of 15 years. And so, because as you say, when I see people shooting meth on in the media, they're really presented as like, they're living in a house with a lot of garbage around and they're presented almost like they're animals in a zoo, not like they're real people. Like, why would you? presented as if we can't empathize with them or that they're beyond our understanding. And so I really wanted to say out loud that I shot meth not once, but many, many, many times. I could show you the track marks on my arms if you want to see them. And yet, despite that, in recovery, my life is very different. And to me, that says, therefore, we should be helping the people that you're looking down upon. Their life would be different too if we can find a way to get them the help they need. I just wanted it to try to help destigmatize people that are really heavily judged, as you were talking about.
Absolutely, I concur. I'm going to circle back to how some of the statistics about how you were talking about some of the racists that are persecuted, because I wanted to give a little bit of emphasis to the Latino population, which is very near and dear to my heart. I spent a lot of time in Mexico and here in New York. Is basically, well, Latinos, his Latinx population everywhere you go. Now, this op-ed, which I'm going to put this in the show notes as well, this is in LA Times, here by our great Mary Beth, Judge Mary Beth O'Connor, good old Mary Beth. And I'm originally from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, so I've got that Southern in me too. I love me a good old Southern name. So the title of this op-ed in the LA Times, written by our judge, Mary Beth O'Connor, is called "It Wasn't Luck That Allowed Me to Become a Judge After Meth Addiction. It Was White Privilege." In this article, Mary Beth gives us this statement: Black men in California are 42% more likely, and Latino men 32.5% more likely to be sentenced to prison than white men with similar criminal records and convictions. For the Latino population in particular, do you believe that this was just like a California thing, or was this nationwide?
It's nationwide. I mean, the reason I cited the California stats is because it was the LA Times and it's, a California newspaper, but the problem is nationwide and it's been a problem forever. I mean, the truth is that origin of many of the drug laws was racially motivated. I mean, Nixon was really racially motivated when they started their war on drugs, right? They wanted to use it as a method to control the minority populations. They said that, it's on some of the recordings from Nixon. I mean, it was one of the rationales. And and even in the 20s and 30s, there was this whole, mythology around the jazz musicians, using drugs. It's always been a social control tool and it's weaponized against minority communities. And think it's not just that you charge them criminally, right? Having felonies on your records have lifelong impacts. I mean, it impacts your ability to get a job. It impacts your ability to get benefits a lot of the times. It impacts your ability as to where you can live or what kind of work you can get. And it impacts the way, your right to vote. You can lose your right to vote if you have felony convictions. And so it's not as if you're just putting people away. Oh, and then there's the family impact, right? You're breaking up families a lot of times. There's no father in the house or whatever. So there's a lot of ripple. It's not a small issue. It's a major issue that has lifelong impact on a significant proportion of our society. And I mean, I'm against the drug laws in general, but if you're going to enforce them in such an unfair way, that alone erodes any legitimacy that they might have.
Now you have a whole heap load of compassion. You're one of those people who actually embodies the tenets of what Christianity is supposed to be, even though you don't fuck with Christianity like that. And it always just tickles my soul in like a certain way that I don't know any word in any language whenever I encounter, a soul like on your level. It's like you have the heart of Christ, you're full of compassion, you care about others, you can think deeply into the full implications of how people will be impacted by decisions, and then you act based out of what is in the best interest of someone other than yourself. And people in church don't do this. And people in positions of authority do not do this. So as a judge, and I know you were an administrative law judge, so you weren't necessarily deciding on criminal cases, but nevertheless, judges talk, you have your opinions on things, and so on and so forth. judges from different disciplines, sit at the same table. Did you find that you clashed with other judges who perhaps were not as compassionate and empathetic?
I'll say this, I train lawyers and judges now, and I train about substance use. And so one of the things that I talk to them about is, first of all, multiple pathways, because it is not uncommon for judges, or not just judges, but judges, parole officers, probation officers, right, to force people into 12 steps. And one of the things I tell them is you're actually undermining the odds of success for a significant proportion of the people you say you're trying to help. So that undermines your goal. But the other thing is that judges and other legal organizations, often they're not using evidence-based techniques. So, for example, in Philadelphia, the court system just had to settle with the Department of Justice because they were refusing to allow people to have medication-assisted treatment for their opioid use disorder. So they were not allow if you were on probation or parole, or if you being diverted into drug court, you weren't allowed to take buprenorphine or methadone, even if you were already on it. And the problem with that is that buprenorphine and methadone are gold standard medical treatment. And they're actually, it's a violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act to force them off of medication. And so, the systems often require perfect abstinence, right? And then you have a massive consequence if you don't have perfect abstinence. Well, the reality is most people can't do perfect abstinence from day one, even if they're trying hard. I mean, I used 3 times in my first 5 months. I didn't have perfect abstinence either. And so if the system if you're requiring perfect abstinence from day one, you're setting most people up for failure. And it's just not an evidence-based approach. And so those are the kinds of things I talk to them about, to make sure that if they have control over people because of criminal charges or whatever it might be, that if they're going to set systems up that are supposed to help them because of their substance use disorder, let's make sure those systems are evidence based and they're actually going to give the person a fair opportunity to succeed and not actually undermine their success.
Now, see what you're doing is causing them to have a gut check moment. Like, what are you in this profession for? Are you actually here to help people? Are you here to get promoted and make money and use vulnerable populations as stepping stones as you step on their necks? Do you actually care about people at all? Are you here, prosecutor, lawyer, judge, police officer, to take out your rage and vindictiveness against people because you have a Napoleon complex or insecurities and you believe that your badge or your gavel allow you to? Why are you here? Have your reasons changed when you first went to the police academy or the law school? Did you have that gleam in your eyes and think you could change the world? Have you become bitter after your in interactions with people and now you just don't give a fuck anymore? You know, you know, I love what you're
And the other
doing. Yeah.
And the other thing is, had you kept up with the science, right? Because look, when I got sober 30 years ago, some of the things my rehab taught me, they weren't true the day they told me them, like the chosen and 12, but some of the things that they thought were true, it turns out aren't true. And we know that now because we have a lot more studies and we have a lot more science and we have other approaches and other techniques that have been tried. And so sometimes people get stuck in what they thought was true in 1992 and they haven't updated it. Well, if you're operating based on what you were taught in 1992 and you won't listen to new information and new studies and new evidence, then you're doing a disservice. First of all, you're not doing your job because your job should include an obligation to actually keep informed and up to date. But second of all, you're not giving people the fair chance that you're pretending to give them. And so I don't want to. I don't think they're all doing it maliciously, but I really think it's important for me to bring to their attention some of the things they may be doing that are are not evidence based. Now that we have a lot more knowledge and information than we had 20 or 30 years ago.
What I love from 20, 30 years ago is how science-based psychedelic treatments are having a resurgence during the time that that whole war against drug foolishness was beginning. We had psychedelics being studied, then it was stifled and,
Yes.
quieted because that would have been, not good for the war on drugs and the people who benefited, from that. And but it's coming back now. Here at the Bronx VA, they have an MDMA study group that I'm trying to get into. There's a ketamine clinic that they're trying to get started there. I think they have one down at the Manhattan VA. So I'm happy to see this starting to come back in government. Um, you can get ayahuasca in different parts of the country. I'm actually going down to Mexico in about 3 weeks. There's a nonprofit agency called the Heroic Hearts Project that sponsors veterans to go to Peru and Mexico to help us with PTSD and different, psychological issues. I'm all for plant medicine. I'm all for meditations, the different things like that. Even though I am for the Trinity and I believe, in God and everything like that, these programs are not the psychedelic movement is not like, say, God-centered. A person can believe whatever whatever they want. It's about the effects that these substances have in a positive way when under a guided whatever the guide be it a psychiatric person or a shaman or whatever the case may be. I love how flexible it is for all belief systems.
Yeah, well, I mean, the good news is, as you say, they're starting to do research again because it's important. We want to make decisions based on actual information. So, for example, for whether it's for cannabis or for psychedelics, people that have any tendency towards psychosis should not take those drugs, And so it none of it's going to be for everyone, but it does look like it under the right circumstances, with guidance from a therapist or whatever it might be, that it it does look like it may help with PTSD, anxiety, and maybe substance use disorder. And so I always support more information and more knowledge and more studies so that we can offer people treatment options. Because the truth is, no treatment works for everyone, right? I mean, some people will respond to one type of treatment and some will respond to another. So the more options we have on our plate, the more likely we are to be able to help someone heal.
Mhm. Absolutely. There's a book by a friend of mine called Emily. Her name's Emily Duff, and she wrote a book called Grassroots, and it really got into. And she's more like into like the whole cannabis movement and everything like that. But she really got into the detail about like the war on drugs and how the psychedelics were coming up back in that time, but then they got stifled and everything like that. So in terms of expansion of education, I wanted to throw that name out there because it's one of those reads you read and you get, like, angry and you're like, "Why did I not know this? Why didn't no one tell me this? How could they?" The audacity of it all. "Give me my psychedelics and my weed, man. We weren't trying to hurt anybody. It was a summer of love."
That's right. But even with cannabis, I mean, a couple things about it. One is that, first of all, America underappreciates the dangers of alcohol, right? I mean, alcohol is still the number one abused drug. And even with the overdose epidemic, more people died of alcohol related causes in 2022 than died of overdose. It's getting closer, but it's still higher. On the other hand, cannabis, which is lower risk than alcohol, doesn't mean risk free. I mean, for example, teenagers in particular, it's better for them to wait until they're older because of the brain development impact. It's better for them to wait for all drugs until they're older. And also, there is a group of people, as I said, who have like psychosis in their family, or if they have any symptoms, cannabis isn't right for them. And so it's really, to me, it's just about providing people with accurate information so they can make accurate risk assessments, right? Let's not exaggerate the harms, but let's not ignore the real harm, the real risk either. Let's provide all the robust, accurate information so we can make choices about what we're going to do.
Knowledge is power.
Yes,
As
yes.
as as Jesus said it, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." Um, was it Maya Angelou said, "When we know better, we do better."
Yes, yes.
So however you wanna look at it, spiritual, religious, or not, good sense is just good sense at the end of the day. I stopped drinking alcohol after this last trip that I took, to the psych ward. In the isolation, within that isolation and the silence, I accepted what I already knew was that alcohol is truly a depressant, and when I was drinking it, it was excavating the anxiety and the things that I was dealing with and trying to overcome. It's sneaky because it is like you said, it's everywhere, it's prolific, friends do it, parents do it, your kids are doing it, siblings doing it, and if you dare go somewhere and you don't wanna drink, people pressure you, "Oh, come on, have another." You know, and it wasn't until I stopped that it's like I felt like that like that alcohol had talons in my heart, which had been controlling me and clutching me this whole time. I'd been drinking since the age of 5. And after I stopped because I felt like God flipped the switch and took alcohol, crack, crystal meth, and cocaine away from me. I don't take away from anybody's, interpretation of their deliverance. Yours wasn't God, mine was all God. Happy we can sit at the table and and talk about it all respectfully. But it wasn't until it was removed that I was like, holy fuck, I can't believe that this thing was controlling me this whole time. And it's just one of those things. Now that I'm out of the forest, I could see the damn trees. so, so alcohol is sneaky, y'all. Be careful. I want to give this warning to our law enforcement people, then I'll let you have the last word, and then I'll ask you those mom joke questions. So, our good friend here, the good Judge Mary Beth O'Connor, is training law enforcement agency people and lawyers and judges and everything like that, and all of the agencies work in tandem with each other: lawyers, prosecutors, judges, paramedics, EMS operators, parole officers, probation officers, non-weapon carrying security. They all know the same frequencies to share and things like that. They have a working relationship. The thing they also have in common is that they have direct influence over the vulnerable population of people who are addicts, repeat offenders, even for violent crime and things like that. We haven't touched on violent crime today. That's completely separate. Well, not completely separate, but separate. So I just want to throw that little nugget out there. It's still in that same population. Some of us turn to drugs after we've had abusive childhoods. Some people, unfortunately, you know, come to a point where they want to hurt other people, but that's, kind of a different area. I just wanted to remind the people involved with various aspects of law enforcement, it's a great work that you're doing, but it is for the people. And whatever you believe spiritually, just be careful how you talk about people, think about people, witch hunt people, and things like that, because everything that as the saying goes in Eastern religion, what the spider does to the web, it does to itself.
Mhm.
Now, whether or not that's gonna be today or tomorrow, be careful what you sow, because 'cause you're gonna reap that back regardless of how you believe. Whenever we have somebody weak in our presence, be they strung out, super depressed, suicidal, whatever, it is an opportunity for us to do good, not to taunt them, make it worse, make fun of them, or get annoyed with the fact that here they are yet high again. Well, that's kinda how it goes. And so it's an opportunity to show love and patience and mercy and to sow that for yourself into the future and for your kids as well. So I just wanted to don't let yourself become overburdened with the negativity and the disappointments that can come along with dealing with such a rough and vulnerable population. Just remember that these are yet God's children, and if you don't believe in God, still they're fellow human beings. And it's an opportunity for you to do something good to that web so that you're not ultimately hurting yourself in the future, my law enforcement people. And I appreciate the work that you do. So now, having stepped off of my soapbox there, anything you'd like to say at all about anything to anyone? I like to let my people just kind of close out this show. So thankful to have had you on here today. And her website, y'all, is good Lord, junkie2judge.com, Facebook, LinkedIn, X or Twitter, whichever one you want to call it. I'm going to put all these links in the show note as well as a link directly to the book as well with that beautiful cover. So anything you'd like to say, go ahead and say it. Then I'll ask you those mom jokes.
Sure. The one thing I would like to say is you had mentioned this sort of the low success rate of treatment, and I know that we hear those numbers a lot, and it's true for each effort. But I want to share good news at the end. And so the good news is that for people who have a substance use disorder in their lifetime, 75% of them will recover. It's just often not in one effort, right? It may take multiple efforts. The other thing, the other positive data point I'd like to share is that when someone has 5 years of sobriety, continuous sobriety, they have an 85% chance of never relapsing again. And so I say that because there's this sort of ideology that we have to stay hyper focused on our recovery for the rest of our life, just like on day one, day 5,000, you have to stay that focused. That's just not true. The good news is that for most of us, it gets easier with time, and it becomes more just who you are. It's just sort of, a normal part of your life. And so I do like to share positive numbers sometimes because we hear so many sort of depressing numbers too often, but most people will eventually recover. It just can take some time.
All right, absolutely. I'm so thankful to know that. I did not know that. I hadn't actually considered like the different time stages,
Mm.
5 years of sobriety. I guess that's a pretty strong foundation. So I'm so happy to hear that. Any kind of hope, so thank you for shedding that light, into all of this darkness, and keep being that light. I don't care how much darkness is around you. You keep shining anyway.
Thank
So,
you.
absolutely. So, mom joke number one, and these jokes today, y'all, come to us from thepioneerwoman.com. I'm channeling my divine feminine myself right now, feeling fabulous with my lilac beard as it is feeling very springy up here in New York, being 45 degrees, which is like warm to me now. So, what do you call a mother cow that has just given birth?
I don't know.
Decalcinated.
I would not have gotten that one. I would not never have gotten it.
Oh, these are just meant to make us laugh. Like, when somebody's actually able to get one of these, it's like a shock, and it's this is a test to the world. When you can still laugh at a mom or a dad or other joke after all the things we've been through, you're gonna be alright. Okay. Mom joke number 2, how do you weigh a millennial?
I I don't know.
In in Instagrams.
I almost thought in tons because, 2,000 pounds, but that's my math going, but that's better. That's better. In Instagrams, that's better.
I thought that was so cute. And, okay, why is a computer so smart?
I like to say because people made it, but I guess that's not gonna be the answer.
Mm, because it listens to its motherboard.
Oh, mom joke, of course, mom joke, motherboard,
Right.
oh my god.
All right, my dear. Thank you so much for coming on this show today. Again, this has been our great judge, Mary Beth O'Connor, junkie2judge.com. And that's also the name of her book. It will all go in the show notes. Thank you so much for spending time with me today.
Thanks for having me, I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much for joining us today and for taking some time to invest into yourself and into the lives of your loved ones. Please visit us at sexdrugsandjesus.com and check out our resource page, our spiritual service offerings, my blog, my books, and other writings that God has partnered with me to create. Find us on any social media platform. Stay strong, my people, and just remember that everything is going to be all right.